I've told you before, Mum, I really don't want to go to Sunday Mass with you. Alexander Bennett's voice resonated within the confines of his Boston penthouse as he strode across the gleaming hardwood floor. I haven't attended church since I started college. That was a decade and a half ago. Margaret Bennett sat serenely at the immaculate kitchen island, her hands cradling a warm mug of tea. In contrast to her son's sharply tailored suit, her simple floral dress appeared somewhat mismatched against the sleek, minimalist setting of his home. Just 1 hour, Alexander. That's all I seek, she expressed. Your father was always present every Sunday. Alexander ceased his restless movement and turned his gaze toward his mother. The reference to his father, whose validation he had chased throughout his existence, struck him with the force of a tangible impact. He spoke softly, urging, "Let's not involve Dad in this. We are both aware of his opinions regarding my decisions." Margaret insisted that he was proud of you. He took pride in the son he envisioned for me, Alexander clarified. The devoted young man destined to inherit his family's modest construction firm, rather than the son who ventured off to business school and established a vast development empire. Margaret let out a deep breath. I'm here for just a week, Alexander. Is it too much to hope for one Sunday morning? The weight of guilt ultimately prevailed. All right, it was a Sunday. However, don't anticipate me to begin revealing my wrongdoings or placing donations in the collection basket. The next morning, Alexander fidgeted in the wooden pew at St. Catherine's, glancing at his watch every few minutes. The evocative scent of incense and the melodic strains of hymns stirred up unwelcome recollections of his youth. Standing alongside his father, striving earnestly for the man's validation. His phone buzzed softly. Passage from Vernon. The documentation for the West Side transaction is prepared, totaling $50 million. Your signature is required by Monday. Alexander beamed. This was his realm now, high-stakes negotiations, not supplications and atonement. Once the Mass concluded, Margaret was adamant about approaching Father Michael, the venerable priest who had performed Alexander's baptism as a baby. Young Alexander Bennett, Father Michael smiled warmly. I'd recognize you anywhere. Your gaze reflects the essence of your father. With a gentle smile, Margaret remarked that he also possesses his father's stubbornness. Father Michael chuckled heartily. At times, it seems that divine intervention manifests through the resolute nature of certain individuals. Have you had the pleasure of meeting our Julia? She oversees all our community programs now. Alexander faced a young woman clad in a modest blue dress. Her warm gaze locked onto his, and for an instant, he lost track of his surroundings. I'm Julia Winters, she introduced herself, reaching out her hand. It is a pleasure to make your acquaintance, Mr. Bennett. As their hands met, her demeanor shifted from warm to one of acknowledgement, followed by a hint of animosity. Bennett, Alexander Bennett from Bennett Development Group, she inquired, her tone growing noticeably colder. That's right, he replied, a sudden edge creeping into his voice. Have you heard of me? Indeed, Julia responded with caution. Last year, I provided testimony against your Riverside project, the one aimed at demolishing St. Vincent's shelter. Alexander released her hand as though it had seared his skin. The memory has come back to me. Your opposition was marked by a notable passion. I think the word you want is effective, Julia replied, a glimmer of challenge in her gaze. Ultimately, the project was called off. Due to financing issues, Alexander stated with a certain rigidity. Thanks to a united community, Julia responded. Margaret and Father Michael shared a knowing look, the air thick with unspoken tension. Father Michael interjected, revealing that Julia had been training to become a nun until last year. She sensed a deep urge to contribute to the community in a new way. Alexander arched an eyebrow. From seminarian to community activist, what a fascinating journey. Both require a commitment to justice, Julia stated calmly. There was an undeniable allure in her confidence, a steadfastness in her beliefs that captivated Alexander, even as it stirred his annoyance. In a realm defined by changing allegiances and tentative alliances, such steadfast conviction was a rarity. We won't hold you up any longer, Alexander remarked, gently taking his mother's arm. I trust you have significant community responsibilities to focus on. As they strolled away, Margaret cast her gaze upward at her son. She appears delightful. She seems like trouble, Alexander replied. Yet his gaze drifted back to Julia, who was now kneeling beside an elderly parishioner, absorbed in the woman's words. After years of indifference, something about St. Catherine's finally piqued his interest, and it wasn't the stained glass or the hymns that drew him in. He was a former seminarian, possessing challenging eyes and a steadfast moral compass, the complete antithesis of all that exists in his rapid, profit-oriented reality. Same time next Sunday? Margaret inquired with a glimmer of hope as they approached his car. I have meetings, Alexander replied mechanically, yet the vision of Julia Winters remained etched in his thoughts. I'll do my best to figure something out. The next Sunday, Margaret gazed in astonishment as Alexander stepped out of his bedroom clad in a neatly pressed shirt and tie. You're coming to Mass? She inquired, placing her teacup gently on the table. Alexander fiddled with his cufflinks, deliberately steering clear of her eyes. I made a promise to you for one Sunday. Why not double it up? Certainly, Margaret inclined her head, concealing a faint smile. At St. Catherine's, Alexander searched the pews for Julia. He noticed her at the front, assisting an elderly man with a hymnal. During the service, his focus wavered between Father Michael's sermon and the contours of Julia's profile. Following the service, Alexander made his way over to her while she sorted through the pamphlets. Miss Winters, he remarked, with his hands tucked into his pockets. Julia glanced upward, her face reflecting a look of astonishment. Mr. Bennet, your presence here is quite a surprise to me. I'm brimming with unexpected twists. I've heard that too, she responded with a hint of hesitation. Your name carries weight before you even arrive. Alexander rested against the table. What kind of reputation are we talking about? A businessperson focused on profit rather than individuals. She kept arranging the pamphlets, although I must confess I was taken aback when you decided to pull out of the Riverside project. Perhaps there's more to me than my reputation implies, Alexander remarked, taken aback by the depth of his desire for her to see that truth. Julia paused and examined him closely. What brings you here, Mr. Bennet? It's Alexander, he clarified, and I'm addressing you. What is the reason behind this? Her question's straightforwardness took him by surprise. In his professional realm, individuals seldom challenged his intentions so directly. I understand you're facing some challenges with the food pantry program, he finally remarked. Julia arched an eyebrow. And you care because I might be of assistance, Alexander stood tall. I possess some knowledge regarding logistics and funding. Julia looked at him with a hint of doubt. Our budget is constrained and we're reaching out to more families each month, but I can't quite grasp how. Allow me to examine your operation, Alexander interjected. Nothing binding. If I can assist in making things more efficient, that would be wonderful. If that's the case, it's all good. Is this a corporate initiative for community service? Enhance your reputation following the Riverside incident? Alexander chuckled. You speak your mind quite directly, don't you? Not when the needs of others are on the line, Julia responded. From her vantage point in the church, Margaret observed their exchange with keen curiosity. Father Michael said, appearing beside her, Your son seems quite smitten with our Julia. Margaret gave a slight nod. She appears unfazed by him. That could be precisely what he requires, Father Michael responded. The next Tuesday, Alexander showed up at the church basement dressed casually, a sight that evidently caught Julia off guard as she guided volunteers in unpacking food donations. You really showed up, she said. I stated my intention to do so. Alexander pushed up his sleeves. Demonstrate the process for me. Over the course of the next 2 hours, Julia guided him through their operation, detailing the intake process, the challenges of storage, and the intricacies of their distribution system. Alexander posed intricate inquiries and meticulously recorded his observations. Your inventory tracking lacks efficiency, he concluded, and you're squandering volunteer hours on paperwork that could easily be automated. We don't have the budget for elaborate software, Julia replied. What matters is functionality, not extravagance. Alexander meticulously outlined a system on his notepad. This would reduce processing time by 50%. Julia examined his proposal with a hesitant curiosity. This truly resonates. Don't sound so surprised, Alexander remarked, a half-smile playing on his lips. In the following weeks, Alexander established himself at St. Catherine's, putting into action his efficient system for the food pantry and assisting Julia with grant applications. The initially skeptical volunteers slowly began to embrace him, particularly as his adjustments led to an increase in serving 30% more families with the existing resources. You're quite skilled at this, Julia confessed one evening, as they wrapped up a grant proposal in the church office. I was surprised to see a developer show concern for feeding families. There's much you remain unaware of, Alexander replied, glancing up from the laptop. Julia locked eyes with him for a fleeting moment before diverting her gaze. What is your true motivation for assisting us? Just as Alexander was about to respond, his phone began to ring. Allow me to introduce Vernon, my esteemed business partner. This is something I ought to take. He exited with Julia left gazing in his direction. Alex, where on earth have you been? Vernon's voice crackled over the line. I've been attempting to get in touch with you throughout the day, as I've been immersed in a project. Hello there. I've discovered our next treasure trove, the St. Catherine's neighborhood. While property values are on the upswing, there remains a wealth of outdated homes available for acquisition at a low cost. Alexander stood still, his gaze fixed on Julia through the window. Are you looking to create something in the vicinity of St. Catherine's? The entire vicinity, not merely the surroundings. Envision opulent apartments, upscale shopping experiences. There's potential for us to significantly increase our investment. That would displace hundreds of families, Alexander remarked softly. The same families that depend on the church's offerings. Since when have you shown concern for displacement? This is all about business, Alex. Reach out to me tomorrow when your thoughts are more settled. The call ended abruptly, and Alexander found himself gazing at his phone, acutely conscious of the tension brewing between his past and the uncharted journey he was starting to navigate. Upon his return to the office, Julia awaited with eager anticipation. Is everything all right? She inquired, observing the worry etched on his face. Reluctantly, Alexander fabricated a story, unable to reveal Vernon's intentions to her. It's purely professional. Julia noted how distinct your world is from hers. Indeed, Alexander concurred, surveying the humble church office, yet I'm beginning to appreciate the worth in yours. A month later, Alexander found himself in the back pew of St. Catherine's, observing Julia as she directed a children's choir rehearsal. He had transformed into a familiar face on Sundays, much to his mother's subtle pleasure. Earth to Alexander, Margaret nudged him, her voice cutting through the silence. The service concluded just 10 minutes prior. He responded absent-mindedly, just waiting for Julia. Today we are examining the quarterly pantry figures. Margaret offered a knowing smile. Naturally, the figures from the pantry. As the children scattered, Alexander made his way to Julia, who welcomed him with a bright smile that had softened her earlier hesitation. Julia exclaimed with excitement that the Baptist Church had called. They are interested in collaborating with us by utilizing your distribution model. That's wonderful, Alexander responded, truly delighted. As we increase the number of churches, we expand our ability to connect with more families. Julia teased, you've transformed from a hesitant Sunday visitor to a community organizer in no time at all, Mr. Bennett. You have quite the knack for mischief, Ms. Winters, Alexander replied, a grin spreading across his face. Their light-hearted exchanges had grown comfortable over the weeks spent collaborating. Alexander discovered that he eagerly anticipated their gatherings far more than his professional engagements. As they strolled toward the office, Julia mentioned, my grandmother's been inquiring about you. She mentions a desire to connect with this businessman who has recently shown an interest in addressing hunger. Should I be nervous? Alexander asked, his voice trembling with fear. After dedicating 4 decades to her life as a nun, she chose to leave that path to marry my grandfather. She has a skepticism towards men dressed in costly attire. I'll just don my budget-friendly suit when I meet her, Alexander quipped. Julia chuckled. Then her expression shifted to one of seriousness. Do you genuinely wish to encounter her? Her home is situated roughly 2 hours distant. I would appreciate that, Alexander remarked, taken aback by the earnestness of his own words. The next Saturday, they set off for rural Massachusetts in Alexander's Tesla, which Julia had playfully dubbed his humble chariot. As they drove, their discussion evolved into more profound topics beyond just church matters. Why did you leave the seminary? Alexander inquired, as the countryside unfolded in place of the city. Julia paused in silence. I came to understand that my desire was to dedicate myself to serving God through community work, all while forgoing formal vows. I longed for the freedom to, she paused, to what exactly? In order to maintain some possibilities, she remarked thoughtfully. One example is family. Yet, there are moments when I question whether I chose wisely. Alexander confessed that family had never been his main focus. My father established a modest construction business from the ground up and anticipated that I would carry on his legacy. When I chose to attend business school instead, he claimed I was turning my back on our family legacy. Did you create such a vast enterprise to demonstrate a point? Alexander tightened his grip on the steering wheel, perhaps initially. At this moment, I find myself uncertain about what I am demonstrating or to whom it may concern. Julia examined his profile closely. Your mother holds you in high regard. She takes pride in my attending church, Alexander clarified. My father passed away believing I prioritized wealth over purpose. What are your thoughts on this? Alexander remained silent. Julia's grandmother resided in a quaint cottage enveloped by a lively garden. At the age of 80, Vivian Hayes welcomed them at the door with an impressive vitality. So, you must be Alexander, she remarked, examining him closely. Julia mentioned that you're assisting with our food pantry initiative. He's transformed it, Julia clarified. We are currently providing assistance to double the number of families. As they strolled through the garden, Vivian linked her arm with Alexander's, while Julia lagged behind. Vivian spoke softly, noting that her granddaughter seldom brings up men in her letters. You have a unique quality about you. We're colleagues, Mrs. Hayes, Alexander articulated, though the term seemed inadequate. At my age, I have no patience for pretense, Vivian replied. I notice the way she gazes at you. Before Alexander had a chance to reply, Vivian exclaimed, Julia, why don't you show your young man the roses while I prepare the tea? He's not mine, Julia began to blush. Embrace the notion of an elderly woman's belief, Vivian interjected with a playful wink before vanishing into the interior. Amidst the blooming roses, Alexander and Julia exchanged a hesitant laugh. Apologies for that, Julia remarked. She leaps to assumptions. I don't mind, Alexander said gently. Their gazes locked. A fleeting moment of silent comprehension exchanged between them. Alexander's phone broke the stillness. The name of his mother appeared on the display. Mother, he replied. What seems to be the issue? Julia observed as Alexander's face shifted from bewilderment to panic. Which medical facility? I'm en route. He ended the call, his complexion ashen. My mother has experienced a heart attack. It's time for me to leave. Without a moment's pause, Julia declared, I'm coming with you. The journey back to Boston was filled with an uneasy quiet. At the hospital, they hurried to the cardiac unit where Margaret was being treated. Only family, the nurse at the station clarified. Julia grasped Alexander's hand tightly. Proceed, I shall remain here. Time dragged on in the sterile waiting room. As the clock approached midnight, Alexander stepped out, his weariness evident. She's stable, he said, sinking into the chair next to Julia. They refer to it as a mild attack, yet Julia grasped his hand, pausing for him to elaborate. Her records were discovered in the system. She has been under the care of a cardiologist for several years, dealing with severe coronary artery disease. She kept it to herself. His voice faltered. The invoices. She has been foregoing treatments due to the expense. She was hesitant to impose on me. Oh, Alexander, Julia murmured. I have millions of dollars. he said with a bitter edge. And my mother has been forgoing medical treatment because she didn't want to ask for help. As the hospital hushed around them, Alexander's meticulously built barriers started to fall apart. Julia clasped his hand throughout the night, a silence enveloping them. Yet both were acutely aware that a profound change had occurred in their connection. In the chilly hospital waiting room, enveloped by old magazines and the soft beeping of far-off monitors, Alexander Bennett, who had dedicated 15 years to chasing wealth and prestige, found himself unexpectedly falling for a woman who had once contemplated a life of simplicity. For the first time, his father's disappointment felt insignificant. "You can't remain here, Mum." Alexander lingered in his mother's hospital room, his arms folded tightly across his chest. "I'm relocating you to my penthouse until you've completely healed." Margaret shifted her hospital blanket. "Don't be absurd. I am entirely capable of making my way back to my own residence." "So, you've been concealing a significant heart issue and avoiding treatments," Alexander retorted. "That will no longer be the case." Dr. Patel examined Margaret's chart. "Mrs. Bennett, your son has valid reasons for his concerns. Your situation necessitates regular observation and modifications to your way of living." "Look," Alexander declared with a sense of victory. Margaret let out a weary breath. "Your focus is on managing your enterprise. It's unreasonable to expect you to take on the role of caregiver." "Observe closely," Alexander responded. 3 days later, Alexander had turned his guest room into a cozy haven for his mother. He brought on a part-time nurse and adjusted his schedule to ensure he was home in the evenings. Julia made her entrance that afternoon, carrying a casserole dish in hand. She declared, "Homemade lasagna. The recipe passed down from my grandmother." Margaret radiated joy from her armchair. "Julia, how considerate. Alexander has been attempting to cook, but the unfortunate lad can hardly handle making toast." I overheard Alexander's voice coming from the kitchen, where he was clumsily organizing the plates. Julia stepped in, gracefully assuming control. "I'm here to assist you." Their hands grazed against each other, and Alexander experienced that well-known warmth enveloping him once more. "Thank you for being here," he murmured softly. "Your visits bring a radiant joy to Mum." "Only your mother?" Julia inquired, a subtle smile gracing her lips. Just as Alexander was about to reply, his phone began to ring. Vernon's name illuminated the screen. He brought it to a hush. For the third time today, Alexander elaborated. "He seems displeased with me." Julia inquired about the development project. Alexander gave a slight nod. "I've been procrastinating. The longer I stay at St. Catherine's, the more I oppose the idea of luxury condos taking the place of affordable housing." "What a surprising shift for Alexander Bennett," Julia remarked playfully. Yet her gaze revealed a more profound sentiment. "Perhaps it's not a transformation," Alexander mused. "Perhaps it's a comeback." During dinner, Margaret recounted tales from Alexander's early years, leaving him feeling quite sheepish. Margaret shared with Julia that he served as an altar boy until the age of 14. Father Thomas remarked that he had never encountered a child quite so serious. "Mum," Alexander sighed in exasperation. "It's truly refreshing to witness this aspect of you once more," Margaret remarked. "The one that values more than just short-term profits." Once dinner had concluded, Margaret took a moment to relax, leaving Alexander and Julia to gaze out from his balcony at the twinkling city lights below. "Your mother is proud of you," Julia said. "The authentic self." Alexander confessed he was uncertain about who that was anymore. For years, achievement was defined by larger endeavors and increased financial gain. At this moment, Julia urged, "Now I find myself eagerly anticipating Sunday Mass," he said with a light chuckle, "to the food pantry inventory and grant applications, to enjoying time with a former seminarian," Julia inquired gently. Alexander pivoted to confront her. "Absolutely." The moment lingered between them, brimming with potential. Julia was the one to shatter the stillness first. "The project in the South End that Vernon keeps inquiring about. That encompasses the areas surrounding St. Catherine's. Correct?" Alexander gave a hesitant nod. "That's the reason I've been steering clear of him." 6 blocks of urban renewal that would uproot half of our food pantry families. Our families, Julia reiterated, a smile gracing her lips. You've truly transformed. Gratitude flowed from Alexander's lips, a simple acknowledgement of your impact. Julia gently shook her head. No, this has always been a part of you. All you had to do was recall. The following morning, Alexander stepped into his office for the first time in a fortnight. Vernon stood in the conference room, his footsteps echoing as he paced back and forth, anticipation hanging in the air. Vernon snapped. Finally decided to grace us with your presence at work. My mother experienced a heart attack, Alexander responded calmly. Vernon eased a bit. Apologies for the inconvenience, but we have a business to manage and your absence has been noted. The investors in the South End are beginning to feel restless. I refuse to do it, Vernon. Excuse me? The South End Initiative. I am not causing those families to be displaced. Vernon fixed his gaze on him. What has transpired with you, Alex? This church charity work was intended as a public relations strategy, rather than a shift in career path. It has prompted me to reconsider what truly holds significance. Alexander responded. It's that girl from the church, isn't it? Vernon is facing accusations. Are you really willing to sacrifice millions just because of a fleeting infatuation with a do-gooder? Alexander's demeanor grew stern. Refrain from speaking about her in that manner. You're about to make a grave error, Vernon cautioned. If you choose not to participate, I will acquire your share and move forward independently. Alexander reminded him that he required his contacts for zoning approval. And you require my expertise to maintain this company's profitability, Vernon retorted. Consider your next step with great deliberation. That evening, Alexander discovered Father Michael in solitude at St. Catherine's, readying himself for the evening mass. With a warm smile, Alexander welcomed him into the fold. Wednesdays aren't typically when I spot you around. I required a tranquil space to reflect, Alexander confessed. Father Michael acknowledged with a knowing nod. Is it your mother's health? Or could it be something different? Alexander settled into a pew. All things. My business partner is eager to transform this neighborhood. My mother requires continuous support. And Julia, as Father Michael observed with understanding, Julia, I'm falling in love with her, Alexander admitted, which is likely the last thing she requires. What makes you think that? She devoted her existence to serving others. I have devoted my efforts to generating income. Father Michael offered a warm smile. Julia departed from the seminary, sensing a pull towards an alternate journey. It seems that the route may be broader than what either of you first imagined. Later that week, Alexander discovered Julia in the church garden, deep in contemplation. What's on your mind? He inquired while seated next to her on the bench. Father Michael observed that I've been somewhat preoccupied recently. She inquired if everything was all right during the volunteer meetings and church planning. Julia turned to face him, her expression open and unguarded. He inquired whether my emotions for you were influencing my performance in this role. Alexander felt a surge of excitement. So, what did you say to him? She confessed that she was unsure how to align these emotions with the direction she believed she was heading. I've always been confident in my purpose, until Alexander suggested, a sense of hope blossoming within him. Until you began attending Sunday Mass, seeking ways to assist others rather than gain from them, she remarked with a gentle smile. It's perplexing. Alexander grasped her hand with a tender touch. Julia, there's something I must share with you. I find myself captivated by you. Julia's eyes grew large with surprise, but just as quickly, she pulled her hand back. Alexander, I am unable to do that. I committed myself to a life of service. I'm not suggesting you give that up, he said hastily. But is there truly no space in your vocation for love? I don't know, she whispered, rising to her feet. I require some time to reflect. As she strolled away, Alexander lingered on the bench, the evening shadows stretching around him, pondering whether he had just forfeited something invaluable before it had genuinely commenced. Alexander gazed intently at the legal documents laid out before him on the desk. Are you truly committed to this buyout proposal? Vernon rested against the window of Alexander's office, utterly grave. It's time to make a decision about the South End project. Either you fully commit, or I will buy you out at market value and move forward without your involvement. According to Alexander, those properties accommodate more than 200 families. A great number of them have resided there for generations. Since when did you begin to prioritize families over profits? Vernon exclaimed in disbelief. This behavior is uncharacteristic for you, Alex. Alexander gazed at the Boston skyline, a tapestry of structures proudly showcasing his company's emblem. Each had once symbolized achievement for him. At that moment, he perceived a new reality. I'm launching a foundation, Alexander declared, dedicated to preserving our neighborhoods and promoting affordable housing. Vernon chuckled heartily. Surely you must be kidding. The Bennett Community Trust, Alexander said, as he smoothly pushed a prospectus across the desk. I am reallocating $30 million in personal assets to support this initiative. Vernon grasped the document, his demeanor transforming from a light-hearted grin to one of disbelief. You've completely lost your senses. Perhaps I've discovered it, Alexander replied. Once Vernon had stormed out, Alexander reached out to his attorney to wrap up the foundation paperwork. Just as he finished the call, his mother stepped into the doorway. Margaret noted the look of distress on your face. It's all about the business choices, Alexander said, shutting his laptop with a decisive click. Margaret positioned herself opposite him. Today, Julia reached out to see how I was doing. That was quite generous of her. Margaret observed with keen attention that she appeared preoccupied, as if her thoughts were entangled in emotional affairs. With a heavy sigh, Alexander exhaled. Mom, please stop. As if he hadn't uttered a word, Margaret pressed on, recounting the moment of your father's passing. My greatest sorrow lies in the unspoken words that lingered between you both. Dad's disappointment in me was unmistakable, Alexander remarked with a touch of bitterness. Margaret gently shook her head, a subtle gesture that spoke volumes. Alexander, your father held great pride in you. He simply lacked the ability to express it. On the eve of his heart attack, he shared with his friends an article featuring your company in the Business Journal. Alexander glanced upward, taken aback. He remained silent. Margaret spoke softly, noting that the Bennett men have always found it difficult to express their emotions. Avoid repeating the error with Julia. In the serene embrace of her grandmother's garden, Julia busied herself with the delicate task of deadheading roses, the crisp autumn air wrapping around her like a gentle reminder of the season's change. It's been weeks since you brought up your charming businessman, Vivian noted, passing Julia the pruning shears. Julia responded too swiftly, indicating there was nothing to discuss. Vivian said with a hint of doubt. The very same emptiness that has you gazing into the void rather than tending to my cherished roses. Julia let out a deep breath. He confided that he's developing feelings for me. The horror, Vivian stated flatly. Gran, this is not amusing. I departed from the seminary as I sensed a calling towards community service. And where, precisely, is it stated that service is devoid of love? Vivian inquired. It doesn't, yet Julia's voice faded away. But what is it? What if my affection for him diverts me from my true purpose? Julia inquired gently. Vivian placed her gardening tools aside. Allow me to share a thought with you regarding callings, my dear. For 4 decades, I devoted myself to a life of faith, unwavering in my commitment. It was during my time at the hospital that I encountered your grandfather, who was serving as a doctor there. However, you did leave your order, Julia noted. I didn't abandon my true path, Vivian clarified. I discovered a fresh manifestation of it. For 3 decades, we dedicated ourselves to operating a clinic in areas that other physicians overlooked. She grasped Julia's hands with her worn and calloused ones. Belief transcends mere acts of service, my dear. It's about acknowledging the gifts that come in surprising shapes. In Boston once more, Alexander participated in a gathering with local representatives regarding his new foundation. The community center hummed with doubt. One resident questioned the sincerity of Alexander Bennett, the developer acquiring properties throughout Boston, suggesting that his newfound concern for affordable housing seems rather suspect. Acknowledging the skepticism, Alexander responded with understanding. My company has concentrated on luxury development. However, I am creating this foundation using my personal funds, distinct from Bennett Development Group. What has shifted? An elderly woman inquired straightforwardly. Alexander pondered the inquiry. I began to pay attention to voices I had once overlooked. With the arrival of December, St. Catherine's underwent a delightful transformation adorned with festive Christmas decorations. As Alexander hung the wreaths, his mother watched from her chair, a sense of renewed strength beginning to fill her. The Christmas Eve service has always been my favorite, Margaret remarked. Since the passing of Dad, Alexander came to the realization that they hadn't attended. Margaret nodded, maybe this year. That sounds good, Alexander concurred. Later that day, he discovered Julia meticulously arranging donations for Christmas baskets in the church basement. Assistance is what he proposed. Without fail, she responded with a subtle smile. They toiled together in a comfortable hush. Their exchanges remained laced with the unease of his revelation and her retreat. Julia finally spoke up, mentioning she had heard about your foundation. That represents a considerable dedication. It's the right thing to do, Alexander said with a straightforward tone. And what about Vernon? Angry, yet we found common ground. He maintains the business name and oversees commercial endeavors. I steer the residential division toward uncharted territories, and Julia responded with an approving nod. You are crafting a new chapter in your father's story, shaped by your unique vision. I'm making an effort, Alexander confessed, although I'm still in the process of understanding what that truly entails. Julia paused her task of sorting canned goods, finally turning to confront him directly for the first time in weeks. I regret leaving that day in the garden. Your words took me by surprise. I shouldn't have placed you in that situation, Alexander remarked. I understand the significance of your contributions in this space. Julia concurred, recognizing its significance. Recently, I found myself contemplating whether my purpose holds deeper significance than I first realized. A glimmer of hope sparked within Alexander, yet just as he was about to speak, a volunteer named Julia was summoned to address a delivery problem. She inquired about postponing this conversation. Anytime, Alexander vowed, observing her departure with the feeling that a significant change was occurring between them once more. As Christmas Eve drew near, Alexander wrapped up arrangements for his mother's medical care, set up the inaugural board of directors for the foundation, and made an effort to avoid tallying the days since his last significant conversation with Julia. The way ahead was still shrouded in uncertainty, yet for the first time in many years, he sensed a newfound assurance that he was on the right track. As the snowflakes danced softly through the air, Alexander and Margaret made their way to St. Catherine's for the Christmas Eve Mass in Boston. The church radiated warmth from the flickering candlelight, with evergreen boughs and vibrant red ribbons embellishing each pew. Alexander assisted his mother as she ascended the steps, mindful of her ongoing recovery. It's stunning, Margaret murmured, her eyes fixed on the glowing sanctuary. The church was brimming with people inside. Alexander noticed Julia by the altar, meticulously organizing the last touches with the children's choir. She donned a modest red dress, her hair cascading in gentle waves around her shoulders. As she looked up and caught sight of him, her smile radiated a warmth that enveloped his entire being. They settled into a middle pew, encircled by families and familiar faces from the parish that Alexander had come to know during his months of volunteering. Mrs. Abernathy, ever the one to ask for a little more cereal for her beloved grandchildren, offered a nod of acknowledgement. Mr. Diaz, grateful for the rescue of his apartment building by Alexander's foundation, clasped his hand with genuine warmth. Look at you, Margaret said softly. A few months back, you were eager to escape this church. Now you're welcoming everyone as if you've known them for ages. It dawned on Alexander that they shared a bond of friendship. This is a collective. The service commenced with the children's choir gracefully walking down the aisle, their voices lifting in a rendition of O Come All Ye Faithful. Father Michael moved ahead, offering a friendly nod to Alexander and Margaret as he went by. During the sermon, Father Michael shared insights on the beauty of unexpected gifts. Occasionally, the most profound gifts come wrapped in unexpected packages. He remarked, his gaze momentarily connecting with Alexander's. Our intentions do not always align with a higher purpose. Our schedules do not align with his. As the congregation rose for communion, Margaret clutched Alexander's arm tightly. Your father would be proud of the man you've become, she murmured softly. For the first time, Alexander sensed the depth of those words, a soothing remedy for the ache he had borne for years. Following the service, the congregation convened in the parish hall to enjoy hot chocolate and cookies. Amidst the bustling crowd, Alexander's gaze drifted away from Julia, and he began to seek her out while assisting his mother through the lively gathering. Are you in search of someone? Father Michael inquired, materializing next to them. Julia, Alexander confessed. I wanted to extend my warmest wishes for a Merry Christmas to her. With a knowing smile, Father Michael remarked that she had mentioned something about retrieving gifts from her office. Alexander ensured his mother was at ease with her friends before heading to the church offices. In his pocket lay a small jewelry box, holding the antique locket he had discovered at an estate sale. This delicate silver piece from the 1920s evoked memories of something Julia's grandmother might have adorned herself with. The corridor leading to the offices was serene, a stark contrast to the lively sounds emanating from the parish hall. As Alexander neared Julia's door, her voice reached his ears. What an incredible opportunity, Father Thomas. A year in Peru, collaborating with communities to create sustainable housing and implement food security programs. Alexander halted, his hand suspended in midair, ready to rap on the door. The mission committee is grateful for your willingness to take on the leadership role. A voice unfamiliar and male responded. Your time at St. Catherine's positions you as an ideal candidate. Julia expressed her heartfelt gratitude. Would it be possible for me to take some time and decide after the new year? This is a considerable dedication. Absolutely. Your response is required by January 5th. The team is set to leave on February 1st. Alexander retreated silently, the jewelry box feeling unexpectedly weighty in his pocket. Peru just a year ahead. The timing is absolutely unfortunate. Just as he had painstakingly reconstructed his existence within the community they once cherished, he found himself back at the parish hall, thoughts swirling in a tempest. Should he express his feelings to her? Would that just complicate her choice even more? Was it just to put her in a position to make a choice? Outside, the snow kept falling, covering the church grounds in a flawless layer of white. Alexander ventured outside for a breath of fresh air, observing the way his breath crystallized into wispy clouds against the chill of the night. At last, you've arrived. He glanced over to see Julia standing in the doorway, a neatly wrapped package cradled in her hands. I was searching for you, she said, as she took a seat beside him on the steps. I intended to present this to you prior to your departure. Alexander took the package, fighting to maintain a calm demeanor. I appreciate it, and I have something for you as well. They shared presents, positioned under the softly descending snowflakes. Julia was the first to unveil hers, her eyes widening in awe at the vintage locket. Alexander, it's stunning, she whispered, gently unfastening the delicate clasp to discover a small photograph of her grandmother tucked inside. I trust this won't be an issue, he remarked. When I reached out to her for guidance on the gift, your grandmother revealed it to me. Did you reach out to my grandmother? Julia chuckled gently, her fingers brushing against the locket with a sense of reverence. I wanted to ensure it was perfect, Alexander confessed. Julia motioned towards the gift that remained untouched. Now I feel a sense of shame about my own. As Alexander peeled away the wrapping, he discovered a leather-bound journal, his initials elegantly embossed on the cover. Julia explained that for your new foundation, it's important to capture your vision and journey. It's absolutely perfect, Alexander remarked with genuine sincerity. Thank you very much. They lingered in quietude for a moment, observing the snow cascade gently around them. The church windows radiated a warm glow, illuminating the white ground with vibrant hues filtered through the intricate stained glass. I caught your words, Alexander finally remarked, regarding Peru. Julia's demeanor changed. Oh, it seems like a fantastic chance. Indeed, she concurred, applying all the knowledge I've gained here to assist communities in developing sustainable food and housing initiatives. When do you plan to depart? February, should I choose to accept. Julia examined his features closely. The choice is far from straightforward. Alexander inhaled deeply, selecting his words with precision. I want you to understand that no matter what you choose, I will be there for you. If that involves assisting from here while you're in Peru, or Julia suggested when he paused, or discovering a way to visit, Alexander went on, even supporting the program through the foundation. He met her gaze directly. I wish to hold on to what we've discovered together, Julia. What discoveries have we made? She inquired gently. Rather than responding verbally, Alexander softly caressed her cheek, allowing her the space to withdraw if she chose to. As she hesitated, he leaned in closer and pressed his lips to hers. A soft, inquiring kiss that sought permission rather than imposed itself. As they separated, delicate snowflakes nestled against their eyelashes. Julia kept her eyes shut for a brief moment. I've been wrestling with this emotion, she murmured, for I believed that loving you would signify forsaking my purpose. And now, Alexander inquired, as Julia lifted her eyelids, the azure depths mirroring the vibrant hues from the stained glass windows. Now I find myself contemplating whether my passion can also embrace love. Alexander grasped her hands gently. Your creations are an integral part of your identity, Julia. I would never request that you relinquish that, be it here in Peru or anywhere else for that matter. What about you? Julia inquired. Your mother, the cornerstone of your journey, the bedrock of all that you are creating here. Some pursuits are worth chasing, Alexander remarked plainly, as are certain individuals. As they stood side by side beneath the softly descending snow, the bells of St. Catherine began to toll at midnight, heralding the arrival of Christmas Day. Behind them, parishioners flowed from the parish hall, their voices lifted in the quiet of the night. In that instant, beneath the ringing bells and enveloped by melody, Julia lifted herself onto her tiptoes and kissed Alexander once more, a kiss filled with resolve and assurance. Merry Christmas, Alexander, she murmured softly against his lips. Merry Christmas, Julia, he said, embracing her tightly as the snowflakes danced around them, turning the world into a realm of fresh beginnings and endless potential. 5 years had gone by since that snowy Christmas Eve when Alexander and Julia first confessed their love for one another. St. Catherine's was now adorned with Easter lilies and spring blossoms, as sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across the gathered congregation. Alexander fidgeted with his tie, a wave of anxiety washing over him as he settled next to his mother in the front pew. Margaret, feeling more vibrant than she had in years due to attentive medical care, gently patted his hand in a comforting manner. Cease your restless movements, she murmured. All is in flawless harmony. Is my tie aligned properly? He inquired for the third time. Just as direct as it had been moments earlier, Margaret responded with a grin. The church brimmed with people, not only the usual parishioners but also residents from the Bennett Community Housing Complex, which had taken the place of the dilapidated apartments once intended for luxury living. Progression. Over the course of 5 years, Alexander's foundation successfully established affordable housing for more than 300 families, complete with community gardens and support programs crafted under Julia's expert guidance. Father Michael, accompanied by a younger priest in light of his advancing years, made his way to the altar as the organ resonated with the opening hymn. The congregation stood, and Alexander's gaze drifted to the rear of the church, anticipating Julia's arrival. Take a deep breath, Margaret whispered. She will arrive shortly. The last 5 years unfolded in ways that neither Alexander nor Julia could have foreseen. She traveled to Peru, dedicating 14 months to spearheading the mission project. Alexander made 4 visits, leading to his foundation ultimately collaborating with the program to broaden its impact. Upon her return to Boston, Julia took on the role of Director of Community Programs at the Bennett Foundation, leveraging her experience from Peru to enhance their local initiatives. Their bond had grown stronger through correspondence, virtual conversations, and in-person meetings, as their distinct journeys ultimately aligned towards a common goal. As the congregation lifted their voices in the final verse of "Christ the Lord is risen today," Julia emerged at the back of the church, glowing in a modest cream dress, cradling a delicate bouquet of spring flowers. Beside her stood her grandmother Vivian, now 85 yet still impressively lively, radiating pride. Alexander's breath hitched at the sight of her. After 5 years, she still held this power over him. As the last notes of the music lingered in the air, Father Michael took a step forward. "Dear friends, we come together on this Easter Sunday, a day of renewal and fresh starts, to honor not just the risen Lord, but also the joining of two hearts whose paths have brought them to this moment to pledge their devotion before God and our community." An undercurrent of anticipation flowed through the assembly. Although there had been whispers and speculation surrounding this announcement, Alexander and Julia managed to keep their intentions under wraps until now. On this Easter Sunday, Alexander and Julia have decided to exchange their vows. Father Michael continued. Their tale, originating at St. Catherine's, serves as a poignant reminder that love frequently emerges in the most surprising of locations, guiding us toward journeys we never envisioned. As Julia strolled gently down the aisle, her grandmother by her side, Alexander recalled their initial clash, her doubts about his motives, and the slow, steady journey toward mutual trust they had embarked upon. He reminisced about the evenings in Peru, perched on a modest porch, observing the stars emerge above the mountains as they shared their aspirations for the communities they left behind. As Julia approached him, Alexander grasped her hands gently. In her gaze, he recognized the same unwavering conviction that resonated within him, a belief that their distinct paths had been destined to converge all along. "Dearest friends," Father Michael commenced the ceremony, his voice resonating through the quiet sanctuary. The ceremony began with readings curated by Julia, accompanied by music handpicked by Alexander, and vows they crafted together, embodying their shared beliefs and dedication to serving others as a united front. "I vow to stand by your side," Alexander declared, gently sliding a modest gold ring onto Julia's finger. "To journey with you in devotion and in service, to create a life together that respects and celebrates both." Text, "I vow to honor your kind spirit," Julia replied, her tone unwavering as she set his ring in place. "A symbol of your father's enduring legacy that thrives in your endeavors, and to confront any obstacles that arise with unwavering faith and determination." Once they were declared husband and wife, the audience burst into applause. In the front row, Margaret dabbed at the tears glistening in her eyes. Beside her sat Vernon, who had ultimately made peace with Alexander after witnessing the success of the Foundation's method. The gathering took place in the parish hall, beautifully adorned with blossoms and shimmering lights. The children from the housing complex gifted the couple with cards they had crafted themselves. Vivian captivated her audience with tales of her early doubts regarding the developer who had once wandered through her garden. As dusk settled in, Alexander and Julia quietly made their way to the church garden, a place filled with the echoes of their countless heartfelt discussions. The bench where he had initially revealed his emotions now displayed a modest plaque celebrating Margaret's complete recovery. "So," Alexander said, taking Julia's hand, "Mrs. Bennett, do you have any regrets about marrying someone who was once hesitant about church?" Julia laughed, her laughter ringing with the same joy as the Easter bells that had chimed earlier. "None at all, though I still find it hard to believe that your journey started with not wanting to take your mother to Sunday, Massachusetts. The most unexpected choice I ever made," Alexander said, drawing her near. "It brought me to you, to the Foundation, to Peru, and to all that we've created together," Julia replied. Above them, the stained glass windows of St. Catherine's Court shimmered, the setting sun casting rainbows of light across the garden. 5 years had transformed not just their lives, but the community around them, families with stable housing, a thriving church outreach program, and a foundation that was expanding to other neighborhoods. "What do you think the next 5 years will bring?" Julia inquired, leaning her head against his shoulder. "With every challenge comes a chance to assist," Alexander responded. Perhaps a family of our own to take to Sunday Mass? Julia smiled up at him. I'd like that. As they made their way back to the wedding reception, Alexander noticed the church's spire, set against the evening sky. He recalled standing outside it years prior, checking his watch with impatience, never envisioning that, with some reluctance, accompanying his mother to Mass would lead him to rediscover not only faith and purpose but also a love that would change everything.